Apollo and Marsyas. The real duel of Apollo and Marsyas, absolute ear versus immense range, takes place in the evening, when, as we already know, the judges have awarded victory to the god. Bound tight to a tree, meticulously stripped of his skin, Marsyas howls. Before the howl reaches his tall ears, he reposes in the shadow of that howl. Shaken by a shudder of disgust, Apollo is cleaning his instrument. Only seemingly is the voice of Marsyas monotonous and composed of a single vowel. Ah! In reality, Marsyas relates the inexhaustible wealth of his body, bald mountains of liver, white ravines of aliment, rustling forests of lung, sweet hillocks of muscle, joints, bile, blood, and shudders, the wintry wind of bone over the salt of memory. Shaken with a shudder of disgust, Apollo is cleaning his instruments. Now to the chorus is joined the backbone of Marsyas, in principle the same, only deeper with the addition of rust. This is already beyond the endurance of the god with nerves of artificial fibre. Along a gravel path, hedged with box, the victor departs, wondering whether out of Marsyas' howling there will not someday arise a new kind of art, let us say concrete. Suddenly, at his feet falls a petrified nightingale. He looks back and sees that the hair of the tree to which Marsyas was fastened is white completely. Terrible and not unbeautiful. What time is it? Sorry. Okay, we go for another 10 minutes or so. Yeah. Herbert, one of his great books is called Barbarian in the Garden, prose book about the glories of European art, culture, architecture, temples, pictures, Renaissance Florence, the temples of Sicily, Greek temples in Sicily. All kinds of intellectual rapture sings out in these essays. So he actually traveled quite a bit from he was in the 50s. So he was in his 20s, 30s, and spent a lot of time in Paris, in Germany, in Vienna, in London, in America. But this poem is about not escaping, not leaving, facing what produced him, being faithful, returning. He produced a character called Mr. Cogito who stood in for him. Mr. Cogito is a mask, a persona. So this poem is called Mr. Cogito, The Return, and it's about keeping faith with that place. Anybody who belongs to Ireland, north or south, knows all about this too. But it appealed to me especially during the so-called Troubles, when I was working in America and at the same time didn't feel I could shrug off anything just because I was away. I apologize for that autobiographical swank, but there it is. 349. But it's true that the poets of Poland, the poets of Middle Europe, of Eastern Europe, were particularly attractive to, I think, us in the North, because, for better or worse, depending on which side you're on, history wasn't, I was going to say, hasn't quite been settled. History isn't at an end. The settlement hasn't been quite reached in the North. I mean, there are structures in place. There is a hell of a lot of change. But what I grew up with was unfinished. And in the minority, a kind of distrust of official rhetoric, an awareness that there were two stories, always. And I think that hard-bitten awareness of a double reality, which is present in a lot of the poets of late 20th century Eastern Europe. That was very attractive. It was different from lyric settlements. It was ironical suspicion. 3, 4, 1. I think it's in that book too, isn't it? Different translation, maybe. Oh, I know, I was going to read it from this here. I beg your pardon, different translation. Mr. Cogito, the return. Mr. Cogito has made up his mind to return to the stony bosom of his homeland. The decision is dramatic. He will regret it bitterly. But no longer can he endure empty, everyday expressions. Comment allez-vous? Wie geht's? How are you? At first glance, simple. The questions demand a complicated answer. Mr. Cogito tears off the bandages of polite indifference. He has stopped believing in progress. He is concerned about his own wound. Displays of abundance fill him with boredom. He became, this is in his travels, he became attached only to a Dorian column, the Church of San Clemente, the portrait of a certain lady, a book he didn't have time to read, and a few other trifles. Therefore, he returns. He sees already the frontier, a ploughed field, murderous shooting towers, dense thickets of barbed wire. Soundless armor-plated doors slowly close behind him. And already he is alone in the treasure house of all misfortunes. So why does he return? Ask friends from the better world. He could stay here, somehow make ends meet, entrust the wound to a chemical stain remover, leave it behind in the lounges of immense airports. So why is he returning? To the water of childhood, to entangled roots, to the clasp of memory, to the hand, the face seared on the grill of time. At first glance simple, the questions demand a complicated answer. Probably Mr. Cogito returns to give a reply to the whisperings of fear, to impossible happiness, to the blow given from behind, to the deadly question. He will not face what has to be faced, this poet. I think we may be coming towards the end. These are two poems that I'm very, very fond of myself. I used to know a fellow from Belfast called Barney Kavanagh, who was a student president of a debating society, and he used to say, "For myself personally." So these two poems are for myself personally, and they're from late on, from a last late volume of Herbert's. This is called Wagon. It is typical of Herbert to have something as simple and strong as wagon. I'm reminded of another wagon word in the poetry of Miłosz, another great poet. He said, Miłosz writes it someplace, one clear stanza can hold more weight. One clear stanza can take more weight than a whole wagon full of something prose. So, this is about one stanza. If the Emperor Hirohito comes into this in his old age. What is he doing, this century-old man? His face like an old book, his eyes dry of tears, his lips pursed tight, guarding memories, history's mutterings. Now, when winter hills are fading and Fujiyama enters the constellation Orion, Hirohito, a centenarian, emperor, god, and bureaucrat, Hirohito is writing. These are not acts of pardon or acts of wrath, nominations of generals, elaborate tortures, but a piece for the yearly traditional poetry competition. The theme is a wagon, the form the venerable tanka, 5 verse lines, 31 syllables. This is the Emperor's tanka. Taking a seat on a train of the state railway line, I meditate on the world of my grandfather, the Emperor Meiji. A poem ostensibly mundane, with its breath held, no false posturings. Different from the glibly lacrymal, tearful handiwork of modernity, full of triumphal howling. The Emperor's poem is a scrap on the railway, devoid of melancholy, of the bustle of the long journey, even devoid of pity and hope. I think of Hirohito with an aching heart, his stooped shoulders, his frozen face, his frozen head, his old doll's face. I think of his dry eyes, small hands, slow mind, like the pause between one screech of the owl and another. I wonder with an aching heart, what will be the fate of traditional poetry? Will it pass away after the Emperor's shadow, perishable, negligible? The Emperor is one of the victims now. He's one of the defeated. He is one of those who don't complain, who writes, who implies desolation, atom bombs, destruction, defeat, world order upended by writing a little thing about his grandfather. Taking a seat on a train of the state railway line, I meditate on the world of my grandfather, the Emperor Meiji. Understated, chaste, courageous, clear. For myself personally, I want to end with a longer poem and then a poem of my own, Vanity Will Out. But this is a poem that I wish I had written myself. And 458. Oh, let's see. It's called Elegy for the Pen, the Inkwell, and the Lamp. It's such a joy to find in great ones something that you can share. The first place I started had inkwells, oil lamps with globes, and pens with nibs. So this is, come on. Elegy for the Departure of Pen, Ink, and Lamp. I have to confess I shortened it a little bit, but not crucially in any way. Section 1. Truly my infidelity is great and hard to forgive, for I do not even remember the day or the hour at which I abandoned you, my childhood friends. First I address you humbly, pen with a wooden holder, pointed and finely lacquered. In a Jewish shop, creaking steps, a bell over the glass door, I picked you out in the shade of indolence, and before long you bore on your body my pensive tooth marks, traces of the school's angst. O silver nib, outlet of the critical mind, courier of consoling knowledge, of the fact that earth is round, of the straight and parallel lines. In the shopkeeper's box, you were a fish waiting for me amid a school of other fish. I was amazed there were so many objects, ownerless and completely mute. Then, forever mine, I put you piously in my mouth and felt on my tongue the long taste of sorrel and the moon. O ink, honourable Sir Encoustum of distinguished lineage, high-born as the evening sky, slow to dry, deliberate and very patient, we turned you into a Sargasso sea, drowning blotting paper, hairs, flies and curses in your deep depths to mask the odour of a gentle volcano. Who remembers you now, my fond fellows, who disappeared quietly behind time's last cataract? Who remembers you gratefully in the era of harebrained ballpoints, of arrogant objects without grace, name, or past? If I speak of you, I'd like to speak as if I were hanging a next voto object on a shattered altar. Second section. Light of my childhood, blessed lamp. Sometimes I come upon your dishonored body in a second-hand store. Yet once you were a shining allegory. At the bottom of your reservoir, kerosene, elixir of the primeval forests. A wick slippery snake with a head of flames. Slim, maiden-like glass, and a silvery tin shield like Selene at full moon. I was devoted to you, O luminous initiation, lever of knowledge, under the night's hammers. And my other, the shadow that is, and my other, flat head cast on the ceiling, looking down menacingly, as if from a box of angels, at the theatre of the world. 3. I have never believed in the spirit of history, a puffed-up monster with a murderous eye, a dialectical beast kept on a torturer's leash, or in you, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Huns of progress, galloping across the steps of heaven and earth, destroying on your way everything honorable, old, and defenseless. I wasted years learning history's simplistic workings, the monotonous procession and the unequal struggle between the thugs at the head of adult crowds and a handful of the righteous and reasonable. Not much is left, not much at all. Objects and compassion. Lightly we leave the gardens of childhood, the garden of things, scattering manuscripts, oil lamps, dignity, and pens on our flight. Such as our deluded journey along the cliffside of nothingness. Forgive me for my ingratitude, O pen with your archaic nib. And you, inkwell, you still contain so many good ideas. Forgive me, oil lamp, you die out like a deserted campsite. I paid for my betrayal, but then I didn't know you were gone forever and that it would be dark. When he died, I wrote a poem, a sonnet, going back to the Apollo. Apollo's shrine is at Delphi, but there is the myth of Apollo tells of him going each year in the wintertime north to the back of the north wind to the land of the Hyperboreans, up towards Poland, basically. So I thought of him as a servant of Apollo, living up there at the back of the north wind. So it's called the Hyperborean, and it will be the last thing I will read, and Jerzy, bless him, is going to read the poem translated into Polish. So I thank you for listening for so long, and forgive me for overreaching the time. A Hyperborean, or To the Shade of Zbigniew Herbert. Ruined temples, poetry. Zbigniew Herbert, the inside of your head was a littered Delphi, where satellites and eagles sailed in orbit above the gods' besieged hill sanctuary, and the oracle was the one thing still uncensored, the Via Sacra, a Via Crucis partly, and partly actual stone, the untransfigured hill itself. You were a Hyperborean, one of those from the back of the north wind whom Apollo favoured and kept going back to in the winter season. And among your people you remained his herald whenever he departed, and the land was silent, and summer's promise thwarted. You learned the lyre from him and kept it tuned.
Mine is a translation Hiperborejczyk pamięci Zbigniewa Herberta. Gruzy świątyń, poezja. Mówię w duchu do Zbigniewa Herberta. Wnętrze twej czaszki była to droga po rumowisku do Delf. Ich via sacra, po części już via crucis. Po części realny kamień nieprzemienionych gór. Orły zakreślały w powietrzu ściśle wierne kopie swych orbit nad oblężoną świątynią Boga na szczycie wzgórza. I tylko wyrocznia wciąż jeszcze nie podlegała cenzurze. Byłeś tutaj przybyszem z Korei, Zbyszku, jednym z mieszkańców krainy północniejszej, nawet niż wiatr, skąd uniósł był Apollina łabędzi zaprzeń, lecz dokąd Bóg wracał każdej zimy. Ty, dla wszystkich, którzy tam mieszkali, byłeś jego heroldem, kiedy znowu unosił go szum wichru i milkła kraina i nadzieje lata pierzchały. To on uczył cię gry na lirze, starannego strojenia jej strun.
Very much.